This is the regular work session meeting for City of Minnetrista, June 15th. We'll do a roll call first. So I'm Lisa Whalen, I'm the mayor, I'm present. When I call your name, just say here. Pam Mortensen.
Here.
Mike Molitor.
Here.
John Chamberlain.
Here.
Shannon Bruce.
Here.
Allison Falski.
Here.
And Chris Lindquist. Did we lose Chris? Okay, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now
Yep.
I can hear you.
Okay,
All
sorry.
right. And then we have Allie Colfos
Here.
and Mike Baroni
I am here.
and Gary Peters.
Present.
All right, Chief Falls,
I'm here.
Brian Grimm,
I'm here.
and David Abel.
I'm here.
All right, I think that's everyone. Did I miss anyone? All right, with that, we will move on with our meeting. There's only 2 items on the agenda. First item is the strategic plan, the final and update, and then the next item for discussion after that will be the fee schedule. So I'm gonna hand it over to Mike Baroni.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. As you can see by the PDF of the PowerPoint that is in your City Council packet, I will try to refer to the page number that's actually in the packet, not on the presentation. So whatever number you see at the top of your computer screen as a scroll for page number, that's the page I'll be referencing. So we're now about 18 months into our 24-month or 2-year cycle. So I'm hoping not to revisit this again before the year. But what I did have a conversation today with the mayor, and she's got some thoughts on kind of some next steps or follow-up to the strategic plan. And instead of stealing her thunder, I will just let her bring that up at the end, but it sounds like a good idea to me. And I essentially said it would be, I think, something that we could accomplish. I'm not going to spend a whole heck of a lot of time going through each slide. I won't read every slide to you. In fact, what I'm going to try to do is just to highlight maybe 1 or 2 items per the strategic plan area, and there's 5 areas. So again, everybody's seen this a couple of different times, a number of different times over the last 1.5 years, and so I hope not to dwell too much and try to buzz through this rather quickly. So of your packet, it starts on page 3 with the list of strategic plan items or areas, 1 through 5, and then we'll go through each area one by one. So the first one on page 4 of the packet is the infrastructure and maintenance and expansion goals. There's 5 of them that are listed there, A through E. And just to highlight a couple of things that are in this area, you see on page 5, we did cite the 3rd water tower, and eventually there'll be a water treatment plant there someday, but not now. But quick update on that is that we started our monthly meetings last week, and there are some people on site. They're doing staking, and they'll be building a temporary road that will lead the construction people in, and you'll see some more and more activity ramping up here in the next number of weeks. On page 6, we did contract to get the Sunnyfield Road water tower clean, so that is in progress. On page 7, we had a meeting, last meeting in fact, on swamp, and so we're still working on that. The council did adjust the threshold from 75 down to 65, and so I've been sending, I sent a spreadsheet to Allison Falski, and we're going to be committed to looking at that here and hope to bring it back soon with some recommendations on where to go and where to start for the swamp program. On page 8, what's not listed there, but what I think I will add is we are, obviously working on I&I and the Farm Hill roads and the other road projects for 18 and 19, but we're also even working on the 2020 project, 21 project, I should say, the Sunnyfield Road, and we've got a meeting set up for June 24th where the school district and city staff will hear their thoughts, since we just talked about that at our last one of our last work sessions. And then on page 9, the forest main project was completed. So moving on to page 10, which is the start of the civic engagement. That's the title page for that area. And then you can see on page 11, there's 3 goals that are listed there, A, B, and C. A couple things on page 12. We had to cancel the springtime cleanup day. But what we hope to do, we still have to explore it and kind of figure out what dates it would be. There's a lot of details to work out, but we'd like to have a fall date. A number of cities are starting to have some cleanup days similar to the ones we held. Ours is in May, and it just didn't seem right to do it. But I think here, I think there might be an opportunity to do one here in the fall. And then, as you all know, the National Night Out, they moved it their date from August to October. So that's kind of it in that area. So if you move on to page 15, that's the start of the effective governance plan. And there's a couple of goals listed on page 16 that we've looked at. On page 17, we had pop up in April the nuisance property ordinance, and then we even had a resident email us within the last few weeks about that. So that's work is still continue on that. Page 18, just the only item of note there is the phone system, voicemail system that we paid for and installed under budget late last summer. On page 19, we had the Mount Fire Chief in our council chambers in January to kind of talk about finances. I have thrown the ball in Chief Peterson's court about having a meeting in June. The regular June meeting for the Fire Commission got canceled. It was kind of an ad hoc one, add-in one, but we have a normal meeting in July that's upcoming, but we're still trying to get them to have a meeting of some of the area cities so we can start talking about fire district. On page 20, added in the piece about the 7-day direct balloting prior to election day. That was the choice of the council at our last council meeting. That's for that area. The next area is the natural and recreational amenity protection and enhancement. As you can see, the 3 goals on page 22 are listed there, A, B, and C. On page 23, we updated that. We are going with the picnic shelter option. We talked about that at the last meeting. I believe it's on the consent agenda for this meeting to get rolling on that. Moving on to page 25, which is the planned and directed growth. There's a couple of goals listed there, A and B, on page 26. On page 28, we do have to bring our zoning map into compliance. We roughly got a year from the time our comp plan was approved. So our goal is to try to get that completed by the end of the year. So there are some updates that were made since we last talked about this in March. Some change in directions, like in the Lyle Park with the item, and we've got some direction on that. But overall, like I said, we're 18 months into this, and so we're just going to try to finish out what we're doing. And then we've had the same format for a number of election cycles, so I would say this is at least 4 years old, possibly 6 years old with this format. So I was talking again with Mayor Whalen earlier today, and she had a few thoughts, and I thought and now that I'm kind of buzzed through our update here, is to let her talk a little bit about that. So, Mayor? Lisa, are you there?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I was on mute. So, yeah.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now? All right.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. All right. So just a couple minor little comments. On page 28, I mentioned it says continue to work on water fund infrastructure and maintenance per the utility budget, etc. My only comment is so that it's real clear that this is pertaining to growth. I thought the wording just should be something of nature, continue work on waterfront infrastructure as we continue to grow and plan for the future, something like that. That's the only thing there. And the only other, again, a minor tweak is on page 24. Let me get back to that real quick. And that is, it says continue to look for ways to partner with West Tonka School District for shared, it should say shared recreational amenities, and then ongoing SRO partnership, that should go somewhere else. That should go in with our partnership and collaboration area. Because we're not really, the SRO partnership isn't really a natural, recreational or natural amenity thing. So with that, what I was talking to Mike about is, I think what we need maybe at the end of the year, kind of a, and this should really happen every year, we should have a rundown. So in other words, what we'll be doing, my suggestion is you take our goals, the overall high level arching goals and objectives, and then next to them you say, okay, how did we achieve these goals? What did we accomplish? So we say, you know, for instance, in our infrastructure, road infrastructure, we might list all of the roads that we've done, where we're at, that kind of thing, and kind of go through each category and say, how did we achieve this goal, this objective? What did we do to achieve that? So that gives us kind of, I think, a better perspective on what we have been able to accomplish and maybe where areas where we need to accomplish more. That was just my idea. Any other comments from the council?
Shannon Bruce
Okay.
here. I have a few. If it's appropriate to go back through this, I've got several actually. On page 4, where we talk about high-speed internet, it says evaluate infrastructure capacity for both wired and wireless high-speed internet. I'd like to see the wording changed on that to say evaluate proactive measures to attract high-speed internet service providers to rural areas of Minnetrista, because I think that is the issue. And I think just that wording it implies that we need to get creative about how to do that. And, you know, that could be waiving or reducing fees. It could be granting access. It could be subsidizing certain costs to incentivize service providers. But I'd like us to get creative, and I think it's going to take more than just evaluating our capacity. So I'd like to see that change just to say, evaluate proactive measures to attract high-speed internet service providers to rural areas of Minnetrista, because it's not the subdivisions that are having these issues. It's the rural areas.
That's not true. I've spent.
Well, I guess the subdivisions they've got Mediacom, they've got high-speed internet.
That's not. Yeah. You get Mediacom, and you'll tell me how happy you are. I can't tell you how many times I've spent hours on the phone with those jokers trying to get service fixed, and that's with a wire coming into my house. So I don't have a problem with where you're going with that, Shannon, but we can't just say rural because Mediacom, it leaves a lot to be desired. And by putting the word rural in there, you're excluding a lot of the city that pays for this as well. So I'm fine with taking rural out. I'm not aware of the problem with Mediacom in the subdivision, so take rural out. I don't have a problem with that. So. Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah. I just want to make sure.
Okay.
It's not just it's citywide.
Okay, and then do we need council to weigh in on that, or is this just?
Yeah, I just have a question here. So it currently says evaluate infrastructure capacity for both wired and wireless high-speed internet. And I'm not, I think that kind of says what we can do or what we anticipate doing. But when we start getting into being real specific, I'm a little bit leery because I don't want to give a false sense of hope, if you will, to our residents, saying that the city's going to spend a whole lot of money getting them better internet. So even if we don't want to say evaluate, I think to say.
Oh, I wasn't saying I wasn't saying to take out the word evaluate. I just was suggesting saying evaluate proactive measures, which isn't specific at all. It's just evaluate proactive measures to attract high-speed internet service providers to Minnetrista. So I agree. I don't want to get into specifics because that just leads us to disappoint people.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in there? Are you okay with that?
I would agree with that approach.
Okay. Pam?
I'm fine. I'm fine with that too.
Okay. And Mike Molitor?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. So we'll make that minor change there.
Okay. And then on page...
Hold on just a sec. Hold on, Shannon, just a second. Mike, are you
Okay.
clear on what that wording will be? Shannon,
I
maybe
am
you
there.
can.
Yep.
Okay.
No, I have
all
it.
right. All right. Okay. Shannon, you said you
Okay.
had something else?
Yes, on page 13, under civic engagement action items, there's action items are, at least to me, things that we are actively pursuing, hence the word action. And it seems to me if something is not being pursued at this time, it doesn't belong on an action item list. And the gun range it says not being pursued at this time. So I'm suggesting that we just take that off since it's not being pursued at this time. It's not an action item.
Anybody who want to weigh in?
I'd still like to see it on there, even though it's not being pursued. I don't think there's any harm to keep it on there. We are set up for that. You know, there's, you know, the finishing part of it is to be determined and to be completed. I think it should still be on our radar, whether or not we do it in the near future, but I don't want to lose sight of it.
Well, and I don't think we need to lose sight of it. It's just that if you're listing action items, there are items that you're intending to pursue and take action on, and that's not something we're pursuing at this time. So, I mean, you can still consider it and keep it on your radar. But I just don't think it belongs on an action items list.
Well, maybe we need to change the heading and it just should say civic engagement rather than civic engagement action items.
I think I'd feel better with that. Because who knows, maybe some big fundraising or somebody will be donating money. So you just don't know what's going to be happening in the future. I hate to take it off.
Yeah, we can just eliminate action items. This falls under civic engagement, as does the next page, page 14. And we can just say civic engagement and rather than and just eliminate action items. These are things that are on the list to do, but they don't all necessarily have to be done, and they don't have to be done immediately, but they're there for future consideration.
I think that defeats the purpose of having the whole strategic plan. You have action items for every category, but whatever. It makes no sense to me, but fine.
I would just take the word action off, just like you stated, Lisa.
John, what do you?
I would like, splitting hairs on the verbiage, I would like to leave it on just because I would use this report, like personally, when we go to the next one, to keep it in mind that this was something that we considered at one time and may need to be considered again. If we pull it off of here with all the stuff that goes on at our meetings and the different items that come up, I may lose sight of this.
So you're saying leave the gun range on?
I would leave it on if we need to change the verbiage to
take out action, I guess but then do we just take it out on number 2, or we take it out through the entire document? Because they're all action items.
Right.
That was my point.
Mhm.
Right. I agree with that statement.
Maybe what it should state then is that rather than saying not being pursued at this time, it might say may be pursued at some time. So it's not saying we have to do it now. It's just kind of keeping it there as a placeholder, and it may be pursued in the future. So at some time in the future, it may be pursued. Anybody want to comment on that?
And maybe the verbiage that I would say here doesn't fit either, but what would it be if we just said for future consideration?
Okay. Okay. Pam, Mike,
I
Shannon?
like that.
Okay. Mike?
I would just rather leave it as is. Two reasons for that. First of all, this was the 2019-2020 excuse me, plan, and I think by taking it off, you're kind of altering history, if you will, a little bit. So I don't want to take it off, but I also want to say it really is not being pursued at this time. Now, I think when we redo the plan for the next, I guess it'd be 21, 22, and if we don't put it on there at all, that would make sense, because then that's a new plan. But since this plan has already been started and this is an update, I don't think removing it's fine. But I think we should have it there. But I think just saying not being pursued at this time is appropriate. Like I said, for the next one, yeah, take it out. So.
Okay. I think that's a good point. All right. Are we then leaving it on and just saying not pursued at this time? I'd be fine with that. Pam?
I'm fine with that too.
And John?
I'm fine.
And Shannon?
I'm not, but I'm just one, so we'll move on.
Okay. All right. And anything else?
Yes, I still have a couple other comments, if I
Okay.
may.
Yeah.
On page 16, and I thought long and hard about even mentioning this, because it's I don't want to get into a lot of stuff here, but the goal on page 16, the first one that says have frank and open discussions with the goal of building consensus. I believe that the goal should be reaching decisions that are best for the community, not necessarily having consensus on them. And I think when you focus too much on consensus, I think it's the debate and it's the argument and it's the different perspectives that get us to the best solution in a lot of cases. And I have to say that I think the goal of building consensus is putting that above finding the best solution. I think that goal should be finding the best solution for the community rather than building consensus, because I think we've got 5 people on the council that are always going to disagree about one thing or another. And when you put consensus as the goal, you tend to not have tolerance for different perspectives. And I think that is a core reason that we've had some dysfunction on this council. And so I guess I'd like to change that goal of building consensus to reaching decisions that are best for the community.
Well, I'm going to kind of reiterate the same thing that Mike Molitor just said about the previous one. This has been part of the 2019-2020 strategic plan from the very beginning. Now we're 6 months away from creating a new one. We'd be backpedaling and saying, well, that wasn't correct 18 months ago. So I'm not sure that changing the wording here is really the right avenue. However, I will say this, building consensus is not necessarily meaning that everybody has to agree. Building consensus is simply coming to the council meetings, having frank and open discussions, and sometimes, and yes, we're not always going to agree, but there has to be a consensus by the majority of the council. So building a consensus can mean a majority of the council. It doesn't necessarily mean everybody has to agree. It also doesn't mean that you can't bring your ideas, because yes, I think varying opinions and varying ideas, you do reach better outcomes when there's more ideas and more opinions. So I'm not sure that this is saying that you shouldn't do that, and that building a consensus is not doing what's in the best interest of the city. I think it's.
And I wasn't implying that building consensus was doing something that wasn't in the best interest of the city. I think building consensus to me means a universal consensus. And if you want to say consensus by the majority of the council, I think that's something different than just saying building consensus. But regardless, leave it the way it is. I just wanted to mention that because I think in possibly our next strategic plan, we need to look at the wording for that. And
Sure.
and okay. And then on page 20, I just wanted to clarify the last bullet about changing the 7-day direct balloting. It says 7-day direct balloting prior to election days. And I thought this was just applying to the primary. We haven't decided this for the general election.
You're correct.
Chris, can you weigh in on that?
So let me hold on just a second. You are correct, Shannon. We made that decision for the primary, and we will have to make another decision, I believe, sometime in July or maybe early August for the general election. So it should basically say, it should refer to the primary only. You are correct on that. Okay. So I think we can change that. We can change that wording. Mike Maroney.
Mayor and Council, no problem changing that. I mean, it could say, since we're doing it here in June, it could say only 7-day direct balloting prior to primary election day to be done at the 46-day in-person absentee ballot, and then to be determined for the general election or something like that. So It doesn't just hang out there.
Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yep.
And those were all my comments.
No problem. Okay.
Thanks. All right. Mr. Chumperland, did you have any comments?
No additional, no.
All right. And Mr. Molitor?
No additional comments. Thank you.
All right. And Ms. Mortensen?
I just wanted to mention that I am glad to see that we're considering doing the recycle cleanup day again. We really haven't been able to do anything this year, not to our fault, but it'd be nice at least if we can to do that.
Okay, and then just one other question for everybody so that we can give staff clear direction. Would you like to see this come back at the end of the year with kind of, here's the strategic plan, here's what we've done to accomplish these goals, where are we at, where do we need to go from here, kind of a thing, kind of a wrap up basically at the end of the plan?
This was Councilmember Molitor. Since we're going to be creating a new plan next year, I would be fine with just incorporating this in our plan for next year. I feel like we've kind of really beaten this thing up quite a bit. I don't know if we need to hash it over again. I think we're all on the same page, primarily with the exception of a few relatively small things.
Yeah, I just thought it would be a little more comprehensive in terms of what's been accomplished. That's all. Because a lot of their things here, there's still some things missing that we've done and that we will do. So I just thought it would be a nice wrap up saying, here's everything that we accomplished over the past, let's say, 2 years. That was not to redo the plan at all. That wasn't my intent.
This is Shannon Bruce. I agree with Councilmember Molitor. I think it's more important that we spend time on actually accomplishing things than looking back and talking about how we accomplished things in the past. And I'd rather spend my time I'd rather spend our time looking at things that we're going to do in the future rather than reviewing things that we've done in the past.
Okay. Anybody else?
John, I would agree with both. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, John. I would like to see it incorporated when we do look at the next planning cycle. I do agree that we've been through the budget process how many times, and it's always down to the wire, and there's a lot of pressure to get the budgets done. So to layer this on top might be a lot for the staff to do. So, and we only have one meeting in December. So I'm thinking of it would be good to do, but moving it towards the beginning of next year.
Okay. All right. So we'll look at that, or the next council will look at that. All right. So any other comments? Otherwise, we will now move on to our fee schedule. Who wants to take that one? Brian, is that you or?
Well, it's kind of a combo platter between myself, Brian, but mostly Chris. She's the one that put together the schedule that was in. I know it's a lot of pages. It goes back about 5 years, and there's not really a great jumping off point for this. I mean, it's our city only. It gives you a historical look back at least the last 5 years. Now, this spreadsheet was quite a bit larger, but we kind of pared it down to just the last 5 years. Chris has been trying to do some research on, I don't know how many years you've gone back so far to date, Chris, but I think 10, I want to say, or you're still working on it, but you know.
It was 10 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff there, and we could have made it 2 or 3 times the size of that, which would be a lot. I know for Chris, I think this will be a really good way to track things on a spreadsheet versus in a Word document. That's just kind of the formatics of this. But as far as readability, I think we'll still have to continue to work on this so we can have something that you could say and look at a particular item in the fee schedule and say, oh, last time that was changed was whatever, 8 years ago, which you wouldn't know in this 5-year look back, but eventually you will have something that will be a document that will tell the council kind of at a quick look that the last time it was changed was 8 years ago, let's say, as I mentioned. So the idea is just to kind of see where we've been, and we know it's kind of a work in progress, and Chris, like I said, has done a good job putting a lot of time into researching all this to see where we've been. So hopefully as we work on this going forward, it'll be more useful to you as you start adopting fee schedules this year and in future years to see what our track record has been. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Brian, before we have Chris kind of go through it, or.
Oops, am I muted still? No, okay, I'm good. I wasn't going to add too much more. It's more just a chance for the council to ask questions, see some of the history of the last 5 years, and I mean, it came up during the towards the end of the budget process last year, maybe to have the fee schedule at the front end and take a look at some things in advance of diving into budget meetings. So I guess, pretty much wanted to more open it up for the council, see if they have questions, individual questions on certain items in the fee schedule or other items they wanted to talk about.
Hey, Brian and Mike, this is Mike Molitor. I believe I was probably the one that made that request at the time. And I'm sure others, I think, chimed in as well. One thing, you know, in looking at all those information provided, it would be my preference, and I'm, you know, I'll open this up to the council and mayor as well, but since we talk about and evaluate some of these things on a pretty regular basis, such as the water rates, the sewer rates, the building stuff rates, I would prefer that we not spend much, if any, time on those at this point. My intent when I brought this up was to continue with our current process of reviewing those separately, but have a little more time to focus on the ones that we don't look at that often. And so that was, when I was brought that up initially, that was kind of the intent. So that would be my preference in going over this. I really don't want to hash over the water and sewer and building stuff because we do that separately. So.
Okay.
Well, one thing to note too is some fees are set by statute and or, you know, are regulated also through the state. I know, like the liquor license and things like that. There's, you know, there's only minimums that there's a minimum you can charge and a maximum you can charge. So it's not like you can always increase it $25 every year. And you know, I don't know, does anyone have specific questions about a particular item on the fee schedule? Because I know that like WSB and Kennedy and Graven, you know, they always submit their changes to us, and then we always talk about, like Brian said and Mike said, the utilities separately. But some of the other ones, it's just a set fee, and it's just, that's what we can charge. We can't increase it. We can't lower it. So.
This
I mean,
is
yes,
Shannon Bruce. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
Mike Molitor?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a list of specific items that I personally have questions about. I'm assuming others do as well. So I don't know how you want to approach that if we want.
Why don't you go ahead, Mike, and ask. Let's start with Mike and say, if you have specific questions, go ahead.
Okay. Let's start out with the temporary certificate of occupancy. I think we currently have it listed as $1,000.
That's a minimum.
Mike, can you reference the page number in our packet? I'm sorry.
Page 31.
Okay,
Bottom
thank you.
of the page. Yeah. And so, Chris, you're saying a $1,000 minimum, but it's 150% of value of incomplete work.
Right, and so that would be determined by the building department, because.
Okay.
And David, if you could jump in here, how I don't know how they calculate that, because I know sometimes it's just their temporary occupancy is that they have to just, usually it's like $5,000 if your lawn hasn't been put in yet, you know, because of the weather, different times of year. So like it says there, it's a minimum of $1,000.
Right. I get that. My point being is that that this is, for various reasons, has caused some issues, and I'd be in favor of raising that minimum a little bit. I don't have a problem with the 150% value. That's fine, but I think, you know, this is an area where I get the need for it, and if I'm remembering correctly, this is refunded once they have their regular certificate of occupancy. But I think the point of bringing this up isn't so much always just revenue for the city. It's also to incentivize the right behaviors. And I think that we need to make sure, and this is one case where we're putting the right incentive out there. And I think 1,000 minimum might be a little light for what we want to accomplish. So that's one specific example of something that I probably would like to see at least discussed.
David might have, I don't know about the state building code. They may regulate that of what you can charge. David, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, let's have David weigh in here.
No,
Okay.
well, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. What you're talking about is the grading and the issues we've had with the grading, and so it's a minimum of 5,000 or 10,000 depending upon the year, and that's what you're referencing. Is that correct?
Well, it is. I think we've had some other issues too, but and I do remember, seeing 5,000 or 10,000. So then I'm a little bit confused as to why it says 1,000 minimum here.
Because it's 1,000 if a house has their grading done, their sod is complete, and they still for some reason need a temporary certificate of occupancy, that would be the minimum. That means there's something with the building itself that needs to be done, and that's where the 150% comes in. So depending upon what that is and what it takes to finish it, that's where you'll come up with the value. So that's the bare minimum, saying your final grade's done, your sod's in. If you don't have final grade, you're not done, then you're automatically jumping either the $5,000 or $10,000.
Okay. So what you're saying is that we don't really use this 1,000 minimum too often?
Rarely.
Okay.
Rarely.
I think, that's another piece.
Not very often that they have the final grade done. That's usually the one thing holding everything up.
Okay. All right. Then maybe it's not an issue. I think that's one thing that we don't see, in the analysis here, and I wouldn't expect it, is that the frequency of some of the stuff too. I mean, if it's $1,000 minimum, but we very seldom do it, then there's probably not a point in having a discussion about it. So I'm fine with that now that I understand a little bit more about that.
Mike Molitor, maybe what we could do, though, is because of the grading issues that we've had and the finishing issues with the sod and so on, maybe it would be better then to look at the final grade, the 5,000 and the 10,000. That's where maybe the incentive might come in.
Yeah, it's true. It seems like we've gotten through those issues. And I'm not sure, maybe, and I'd be open for that discussion, but I'm not sure if that's appropriate or not. Kind of defer to what the rest of the council wants to do there.
Okay. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Pam?
This is Shannon. I think 5,000 and 10,000 are high enough that, and like Mike said, we've worked those things out. So I don't see any necessity to raise those.
Okay. John?
I guess two questions, and not necessarily just about this, but about the listing here. There are certain things, as Chris alluded to, that are set by statute, probably outside of the city's domain. I don't think, unless, and I've read through this a couple of times, I don't know what all of those are, so there's probably things here that we have nothing to discuss. Second thing would be obviously building permit fees and inspection fees, etc. My understanding is the fees are based on recouping administrative time or city time in administrating it. It's not a profit bucket there. So I certainly am not one that could make a judgment call on them as to whether they need to be raised or changed. Looking at the 5 years, I appreciate, because I can see moving things that have moved over time, and some haven't shown any changes for 5 years, so I don't know how far those go back. But I'm going to assume, and I know what assume means, I'm going to assume the city looks at these, and obviously as fees or as the cost of administration goes up, then our fees need to go up. And I would expect that we are keeping them in line. So I would like to see, I guess the bottom line, I'd like to see on all of these things, which ones are outside of our control, which ones are dictated by a higher organization.
Well, that,
John,
yeah,
this is Councilman Mahler. I think the fact that we see a lot of these cases where we haven't done anything in 5 years and then possibly longer, but we know costs have gone up in 5 years, might prove that assumption wrong. Again, like I said in the beginning, I don't really, the building permit stuff is kind of a different animal. Didn't want to really tackle that, but some of these other things, I don't know. I mean, as an example, we've got in here, delinquent fee payments that every year we have to go through and approve the delinquent fees to be assessed to the property taxes. And it's $30 right now. That's something where, again, if we want to change behavior and get people to not do that process, we probably should move that fee if we can. And given that we haven't, I think we need to take a look at that and say, hey, maybe we need to up that one a little bit. Return payment fees at $20. That I can tell you from being in banking and finance, that's an old number. Banks are and other merchants are much higher than that now. Again, we may not have that a whole lot, but we probably should look at moving that up. Water meter testing, is another one where, again, if you're going to use that as a weapon to try to have a discussion about water rates, which we've seen happen, I want to make sure that that's, we need to have a number there that's not just people willy-nilly. There has to be some ramifications for some of that. Police officer time at $70 an hour. That seems pretty light to me. That might be what we pay them, but it isn't their full cost. That's not a number loaded with benefits and things like that. So, I mean, there's quite a few examples in here. I think, the research costs at $20 an hour on the police side. $20 an hour that's not going to be much for research. I mean, that seems to be an old number too. Alarms going off for the 6th occurrence, it's $100 more than the other ones. That probably should escalate a little bit more so that we have people being a little bit more cognizant of their systems. It's things like that are kind of embedded in all of this that, again, it's about driving behavior. You got garbage trucks in here for, what is it, $10 a truck or something like that. The wear and tear that comes into the city on garbage, we're not going to go down the path of organized garbage collection, but I think there needs to be some reflection that, it does a lot of damage and there needs to be some recoupment here. That's almost laughable. So there's some things like that I think we should be taking a look at that based on the evidence here. It doesn't look like it's been touched in quite a while. At least I know in the time that I've been on the council, which is now 4 years, we haven't touched any of the things I mentioned. So those are the kinds of things I was looking at and had concerns about.
and that's exactly, I think, why we're having this conversation, so that we can all take a look at this and say, hey, maybe we need to increase this or increase that. So a lot of good suggestions. Especially when it comes to hourly for our staff time, I do think we need to actually be reviewing that on an annual basis.
I would agree.
This is Shannon. I think if you're going to consider raising a fee, and I agree there may be fees that need to be raised, but I think the question you have to ask is that fee being low, is it abused a sufficient number of times that it's actually an issue for the city? And because if it's not, I mean, if we only have like 2 or 3 people that pay a $20 fee, I don't know. I don't see the point in. I'd rather look at the ones that are actually an issue for the city and that are causing the city to costing the city, and we're not recouping our costs for those things.
Yeah, that was one of my first points about volume here. That I agree. If it's 3 people, it's $20 a pop. Well, it's probably not worth looking at. But if it's 30 people, it might be a little bit more. And that's kind of one piece that's a little hard for us to realize here because we don't know that data.
But if you're going to be looking at all of your fees, you might as well make adjustments on all of them that need adjusting. Especially since we don't know how many people, how many incidences we have of each one of them. That would be really difficult to go through and very, very time consuming, I would imagine.
Oh, right. And I'm not suggesting that you go back and research it. But I agree with Mike. I think staff is best suited to figure out what those fees are that need to be increased, and rather than the council.
No, I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying, I think staff is looking at it saying, okay, should we, what do you want us to look at? I think that's maybe what they're asking. I could be wrong though, but do we want to give them some direction, look at all of the fees, see what needs to be updated, when's the last time it's been updated, that kind of thing. Mr. Baroni, Mike Baroni, maybe you could weigh in here. What are you looking for from council on this?
Well, I think the comments that we've gotten so far have all been really helpful. Like I said at the start, there's a lot of stuff out there. We just shortened it down to 5 minutes or 5 years in order to make it hopefully easy for the council to kind of leaf through it. But it's good to hear the comments that we've heard so far, whether it's looking at how many people it impacts or how often it's been changed, or what's, as Mr. Mahler said, incentivize the right behaviors and then Mr. Chamberlain's comment about what can we change and what can't we change. I mean, what's directed by state statute. I think those are all things that are worthy questions and probably worth follow-up at some point in time to the council on this as we work our way through the budget. And that's, again, exactly as Mr. Mahler said, that's exactly why we're talking about it now instead of just kind of shuffling it through in January when we haven't any chance to talk about it. And I'm not just going to say that this is going to be a major impact on the budget, but it is an impact. So I think it behooves us to kind of take a good look at it. So all these comments have been helpful. So,
but that would also suggest that any changes or increases that are made need to be considered prior to, let's say, September, when we have to do a preliminary budget approval.
You're probably right, Mayor. I think there's things that we'll have to take a look at. The fee scales have always kind of been a standalone that we've done at the beginning of the year. Haven't really tied it directly to the budget, at least on the timeline that we use. Because as most people recall, that we've generally bought the fee schedule at the first meeting in January every year. So it probably belongs in the budget process, at least so we're at least taking a good look at all these items. So, like I said, all the feedback's been good. We got a little bit of work to do here on some of this stuff, but hopefully we'll be able to take a good enough look at it so it's involved in our budget discussions in the next number of months.
Okay.
I would.
This is Shannon.
Go ahead, Shannon.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Shannon.
I just had one more comment on one of the fees that I wanted to talk about, and that's the building permit renewal fee, which is half of the building permit fee. And when I look at the building permit fees, I mean, some of them are like, if you've got $1 million home, it's $6,000. A $500,000 home, it starts at $3,500. And my question is, when building permits are being renewed without any changes whatsoever, it's just renewing them, is charging half of that, the original building permit fee? It seems like that's excessive, that it's covering far more than it takes us to just renew it again. Because, and maybe I don't understand the process, but isn't the process just renewing it again and putting a new date on it? And does that really cost us half the cost of the original permit fee?
David, I think that would be your question.
So yeah, so it doesn't happen very often. There's only not even a few a year where we run into this. Very rarely is it that it's the exact same house? Usually why this happens is because they're making changes. There's things that have changed throughout the process. And so there's minor tweaks that they've made to the plan. It's mostly the same, but there's, they moved the deck, they didn't want a window in one spot or whatever it is. The majority of the time there are some minor changes to it. And it is a very rare occasion. Very seldom does it ever happen that it's just, they didn't get to, it's the exact same plan that comes through and we're just putting new dates on it. So it doesn't happen very often.
So the permits don't just expire and people have them renewed because they expire?
No, we work with people. All they got to do is show progress, that they're doing something on the site, and that's just showing progress can be something as simple as I pounded a nail in a board today. Okay, you've made progress. And so as long as they're making progress, that permit would not expire. We'll continue to allow them to work under that permit. We do everything we can to work with the contractors, homeowners to keep a valid permit going before coming to a point like this where you've got a permit that actually has expired on you. Generally what happens, like I said, they'll submit a new home permit and then it sits in our office for 6 months. And, the homeowner is out trying to get a loan or they're out, who knows, whatever. It takes them 6 months and that's what a permit's valid for. It comes into the 6 month time frame for that permit to expire. And if they're ready to go, yeah, we're ready to go now, but we've made some changes. Budget made us do this. We went out for bid and we had to change this. And that's a scenario where you're renewing a permit that's already been reviewed. That's more commonly what happens with these scenarios.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have questions or comments of staff?
So this is Pam. I just wanted to weigh in on a couple things. I think all the comments are really good. But I think it is important to identify in the spreadsheet somehow what is set by statute, because then they're kind of irrelevant to talk about. Also, if there are things that the staff thinks should be changed, I would like to see a comparison with neighboring communities. What do they charge on some of the ones that we would like to look at? And if there is areas of bad behavior, I think those would be really good areas to address. And then the other one that I had on here is the credit card payments are right now changing processing fee of 2.75%. That's low. And I think people nowadays are very, very familiar that when they get the opportunity to pay electronically, they have like a 3.5% processing fee. So the difference between the 2.75 and 3.5, it really does add up. So I'd like to look to see what other neighboring communities do, because I think that's something that we should maybe change.
And I don't necessarily disagree. We can't look at that. I would caution, though, to say we should look at other communities, what they charge for other types of fees, because every community is going to be different, and every community has different scenarios, so to speak. So, and different costs associated with the permit fee or with fees in general. So if there's a general fee, like let's say a burn permit, for instance, I don't know that that's in our purview to change, but let's just say it is. I don't have a problem looking at that, but I think it's more important to look at what our costs are and how we can make sure that our costs are covered versus comparing us to another city. That's the only thing I'd caution us about. So.
And I'd agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah,
sorry. Okay. Hold on, Shannon. John, did you weigh in?
No, not in. Other than all the comments again are good. I agree with all of them, identifying, again, as I said earlier, which ones we can deal with. Benchmarking is always nice, in my opinion, but I agree with Chris as well, is that it's hard to compare apples and apples sometimes. But to me, it's what can we change and what can't we change?
Okay. And then Shannon, what did you want to say?
I was just going to agree with, I think it's the city's costs that are the most important thing to evaluate, not comparing costs to other cities. I think that's a lot of work to put on staff that isn't going to yield much insight into much. And the other thing I was going to say, when it comes to interest rates for processing fees, I think there may be statutes that control that, and I'd hesitate to charge any more than it's actually costing the city for processing those payments, because we want to encourage people to process payments electronically, and we don't want to discourage that. So I think you have to look at, are you trying to encourage or discourage behavior? And I think we want to encourage people to process things electronically.
Yep. And if I can, jump in on that one. Yeah, for our credit card fees. So I think it even came up at the last meeting. For our utility customers, the city picks it up, but it's for our building permits and those transactions. We're just having them pick up the exact fees that is being charged by the vendor payment service network. So we're not charging any more, any less with that. So.
And then Brian, I think for the utilities, we actually charge a little bit less than what our cost is. Is that correct?
Utilities we pick up for, we made the decision several years ago that we wanted people to, when it was new, to pay. So the city picks up the cost of the fee for the utilities. We don't pass that on to the property owners at all. It's just on building miscellaneous transactions. Those more one-time fees usually paid for by contractors are the ones that we made the delineation to have them if they wanted to pay the convenience fee or whatever. But for our residents, we figured we wanted to encourage to pay the quarter of the utilities that way. So the city has built that into the budget.
Okay. Do you know how much we pay for that, the percentage-wise?
I think annually when I've looked at, I mean, it's similar to the percentage that's in the schedule there, but I think it's came out to about $9,000-10,000 a year that the city picks up for people that pay their utilities electronically.
Okay.
Which I think is well worth it for. I mean, our collection rate is very high, and we get our dollars a lot quicker by offering a good customer service for people paying electronically.
And the other thinking on that was the less staff time doing that kind of work that can be done by electronic transactions, so staff could do other things.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay. So right now it looks like basically staff,
Where'd you go?
Can you hear me?
Oh, now we can.
Now we can.
Oh, okay. All right. So basically, it sounds like staff will go back. They'll identify those areas that that we have no say in, that they're set by state statute, or I'm assuming state statute, and maybe identify also those fees that haven't been looked at for quite some time that maybe need an update. What else was there?
On that point, could I add something? I know Chris has spent some time researching some of the stuff as to the last time it was changed. Just to minimize that, could we agree maybe that if it's over 5 years, we just say over 5 years? So we don't, if something changed back in 2007, I don't know if I really need to know that. Just all I need to know is, have we changed it in the last 5 years or not?
I agree. I agree. I don't think we need to go back 10 years or 6 years or any. I think 5 years is sufficient.
Right. Just kind of a yes or no within the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree.
That might make it a little easier to research.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? All right.
Yeah, one last
All
comment.
right.
Yeah, or I was just gonna say, like on page 37, we can make more notations. There's a SAC charge that's 2,485. Like in parentheticals behind it, we have set by the Met Council. So I assume that's things that like that the council. I know there's like a safe water test that's by Minnesota Department of Health. So we can make sure that there's notations like that as for all those past or items that are set by other entities that we have to charge. Try to go through
Yeah.
and add
Yeah.
and modify and update some of those items. So
Right. I know, like, for instance, the states go for one calls, whatever, they're a set item, and we can't, I don't even think we can charge for them, can we? I don't think we can. Anyhow, yeah, anything that's set by another entity that we really have no control over, and it's basically like a pass-through, those would be things that we'd want to identify. Okay? All right.
Sounds good.
Yeah, all right. So that concludes our work session. And if there's a motion to adjourn, we can adjourn until our regular meeting at 7 o'clock. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion. It's Pam.
Okay. And is there a second?
I'll second, Shannon.
Okay, so Pam made that motion and Shannon seconded. All those in favor signify with aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, sounds like anybody nay? No nays, so we are adjourned. It was 5-0. We will talk to you all at 7 o'clock. Thanks, bye now.